at the Chamber, and we are excited to bring you this NextGen virtual event. And we have a great panel lined up today. During these changing times, as you know, personal brand is so important. And I'm looking forward to some suggestions also. I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Andrew Walker with Brady Ware. Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about the NextGen program and how you can become involved in this growing chamber program?
Of course. Thank you, Stacy, and thank you for everyone joining us today for our personal branding panel. My name is Andrew Walker, and I'll be your moderator today. I've been involved with the Chamber's NextGen committee for about a year now, when it used to just be a Millennial Monday lunch. It was the goal of the Chamber to turn this into a prospering program of activities. I think we've accomplished that. We got off to a great start in February with our after hours event at Jekyll Brewing in connection with the Chamber's Chairman's Circle members. Since then, things have changed quite a bit, as you'll probably know, with COVID-19. I think it's created a new opportunity for us as the next generation of leaders to make it our time to shine and innovate. Our goal for NextGen is to engage, recognize, and develop the Chamber's future leaders. We want to help you do that, and we think today's panel will help jumpstart your brand into the marketplace. With that being said, a few housekeeping items before we begin. Everybody's been placed on mute, and that'll help us avoid any background noise. We ask that any questions be put into the Q&A box below. We'll try to get to as many of these as we can at the conclusion of today's presentation. If you find you hear something interesting, let's use the reactions at the bottom of your screen. You can give thumbs up, happy faces, clap, and who knows what else you guys might be able to find down there. This presentation is being recorded and will be available later on the Chamber website. With that being said, let's introduce our panelists. Today we have Mike Blake, Director of Valuation Services at Brady Ware, Rory Newbro, Independent Consultant and Content Creator, and Kristen Andre with Andre Consulting Group and No Limits with Kristen Andre Podcast. We're excited to hear from them today and appreciate their willingness to share their expertise and related industry experience. Well, let's get started. First, let's hear from Mike. Mike has experience in technology, digital marketing, and he also hosts a weekly podcast called Decision Vision. Mike, can you tell us about your why and how it drives you?
Yeah, so my why is to empower small business owners to make decisions based on fact and not guessing. I've learned over the years that, larger companies have historically a massive strategic advantage over smaller companies because they have access to more information, and smaller companies, just by virtue of resources, often don't. And they find themselves in the position of making critical decisions based on gut feel, based on experience, which are all important, but data and hard information can add so much to that, especially because we see so often that when you look at hard data, it actually doesn't match up with the conventional wisdom. In fact, it's often counterproductive. And so, the why of what I do and what I've done for a long time is to help business owners take the guesswork out of the most important decisions they're making.
Thank you, Mike. Our next panelist is entrepreneur, YouTuber, and was also on a reality TV show. Rory, can you give us some insight on brand equity?
Sure. So I think it's just really tough to try and break through the noise now. I think early 2000s, we had a lot of opportunity because there wasn't as much branding going on. But now that there's alternates to alternates to alternates when it comes to companies, you really have to kind of find a way to find a space in your industry that makes sense. And it almost needs to be almost entirely narrative now. Like there needs to be a reason why people care, because there's 20 other options that need to be out there. And I just really like to help people now through the consulting and through independent work, understanding what the limitations are, because I think it's one of the biggest downsides when someone starts something, doesn't brand it properly, and thinks it fails because it was a bad product when it wasn't. It just wasn't communicated well.
Thank you, Rory. Next is Kristen, who has a financial background, works with women in leadership, and also hosts her own podcast. Kristen, can you tell us why you may not be for everyone?
There we go. I was not on mute. The title of my next book is You're Not for Everyone. And the reason I kind of went with that is I feel like so many times in business, especially with business owners or anybody in corporate leadership, they spend so much time trying to please everyone and say what they think is supposed to be said and, you know, build a brand based on somebody they're trying to emulate as opposed to who they are as a person. So I'm really into, you know, in my consulting firm, I'm a strategy accountability person, but I really try to customize strategies to fit the entrepreneur or the leader or the business owner and kind of where their strengths are and what their personality and their style is. And that's the mistake I've seen so many people make in business and honestly in life in general is they're trying to be for everybody. And in doing that, they're losing their uniqueness. They're not able to really identify who it is they can best serve and take time to really go after that market and penetrate that market and get to build a brand within that. So I think it's the more you can tailor it down and know who you can most impact and empower and who you were brought here to serve, the better off your business is going to be.
And a question for the group of panelists. Do you think a why is the most important aspect of a brand? And I think I'd like to start with Mike and go through the same order to keep from stepping on anybody's toes.
Well, I'm a big believer in it. I mean, ever since I saw the TEDx Golden Circle speech, that's already a 1998 event. Incredible. That's already 22 years ago. And candidly, it's given me a man crush on Simon Sinek ever since I saw that, because I thought that was so profound. And, you know, being in the accounting industry, how do you think of a why, right? I mean, we think of ourselves in the accounting industry as basically debits and credits, recording things, filling out forms. And if you take Simon Sinek kind of very literally, then by definition, our industry should almost not exist, because it is just counting, and we have machines that do counting very well. They're called computers, right? So our industry must exist and must thrive for some other reason. And it took me years to figure out my why. And I went to the market with other whys, and in retrospect, we're just ranging from awful to dumb. But they're part of the journey of failed definitions of why to find a real definition of why, which gives me confidence when I go out to the marketplace and helps build a cohesive identity, as opposed to being just one of another, 5 million people in the accounting industry.
Rory, can you expand on that?
Sure. I mean, some of it's just how you start into the industry you're in and what you learn and why. But the why is important because it's not just that it helps you define what you're looking for and where you're going. I think the truer answer after you get enough experience is that there are that many alternates and options out there. And without a why, you'll ping pong between them, right? Like there are a lot of viable, correct answers. And if you don't have a reason why you're doing it or a direction you're going in, you'll just kind of halfway go towards a bunch of them. And it keeps you on course to say, okay, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is why I'm doing it. And I believe in it. And that's going to keep you through the hard times and keep you on a good course. So, you know, it's something that's very amorphous when you first talk about it, because you're like, okay, well, I want to make money, or I want to help these people, or I want to do that. But if it's not clearly defined, you'll end up getting lost along the way.
Kristen?
I'm a big Cynic fan as well. So I hugely believe in the why. The challenge I see when it's put into application is a lot of people stop there. And so I think it's first and foremost, you have to have the why and know who you're serving, what your purpose is, what you really want to get out of it. But if you stop simply with the why, that's where we see a lot of businesses start to fail. You've got to also know the how, is to take the why and apply the strategies that are going to move yourself personally, professionally, and financially forward, and be able to really stand out a little bit. But at the same time, always going back to your why. So I think the why, a lot of times when it first came out and people started talking about it, late 90s, early 2000s, it was more, why do you do what you do? And that was their starting point. But I think it's also, once you put the strategies in place, something we need to check back in with to make sure we're still in alignment with our why as our businesses continue to scale.
My next question is, did you set out to create your brand or did it find you? And I think I'd like to start with Rory.
So I've been around in a couple different industries and places, obviously. And I think when I first started doing some of my independent work, it was just a hobby, right? And everyone talks about how it's better to start that way. I think it's kind of facetious to just say, okay, yeah, just have fun with it. Don't worry about it, because you have to be serious about it. So it did kind of accidentally come about. But to piggyback a little bit on what Krista was saying, you're in this for the long run, right? You're looking for something to sustain yourself, something to enrich yourself. And so if it's not in alignment with your temperament or your goals or your dreams, you can derail it. So I think it should always be as authentic as you can make it, equal to what you want, in alignment with your values and your goals. When you're building the brands, like, this is me, and I'm not filtering it, I'm not apologizing for it. And if you can build the brand around that, then you have longevity. So I think that when you start out, it's good to just kind of feel out the waters, right? Especially in the West, we believe that you have to kind of pick your major, pick your career, and stay on it. But really just try stuff, experiment, be willing to fail. And after a couple rotations through the process, you'll realize what you enjoy and what needs need to be met. And that's when you start forming a combination between your authentic self and the product, whatever it is.
Thank you, Rory. Kristen, can you expand on that?
I agree completely with what Rory's saying. I feel like there's always a brand component that we have, and the opportunity we have starting out is not to water that down, to show up as our authentic self and our voice. Brand, when we think of branding, a lot of times we think of, logos and colors and brand aesthetics, but it's also our voice and how we show up and how we're speaking, whether we tend towards positivity versus negativity, whether we are formal versus relaxed. So it's building consistency with that. And I know there were some questions about, your target market, niche market, and everything. The more you can be authentic in your brand, your market will grow with you, and the right people and the right clients will come to you. But it's just a matter of being consistent with the brand. Because a lot of times where people have problems is they move back and forth too much. They're trying to be a people pleaser and not doing what they really want and what's important for themselves and their business, and they lose it somewhere along the line.
And Mike, did your brand find you or did you find it?
I think it was a combination. I think I stumbled around a lot in the dark, and then the universe sort of took pity on me and then said, here's a brand, I'm tired of watching you stumble around. And that brand sort of came to me actually through my competition. Word got around that I'd built a reputation among my peers as the mad scientist. And not that they thought that I was going to blow up the world or anything like that, but that, the way that I approach things is from an area of creativity and, frankly, sometimes reckless disregard for the rules. It's great that I work for an accounting firm, right? And frankly, I don't adopt too much of a corporate image, right? If and to Kristen's point, I've got to read that book. I am not for the Fortune 500 executive boardroom. I mean, that I wouldn't get past security even if I had a meeting, and so I'm not going to resonate with that crowd. But I decided I like that mad scientist brand, quite frankly. It's very freeing. It matches with what I think is an innate sense of creativity. And, I'm okay with that. And I discovered that there are things that I do in my ordinary life and elsewhere that kind of naturally fit the mad scientist moniker. So I decided to meld what I've been building, either decidedly as a brand or just as a why, add it to the mad scientist, and through that sort of chemistry, manufacture a brand now that at least today in May of 2020 I like and seems to work for me.
Thank you all for your insight. It seems that kind of one of the common themes you all mentioned might have been some self-reflection on your own personality and how you go about doing things. My next question is, do you have any insights on how to bridge a generational difference with a personal brand? With that in mind, most of our audience is under the age of 40 today. And many of us work in our current environment with people that are in a different generation than ourselves. Kristen, can you kick this one off?
Yeah, absolutely. I love you're starting with me. I'm the old one in the bunch here on the panel. So, I really think it goes back to authenticity. I'll be 50, so I'm certainly not under 40, but it really goes back to relating to the people and understanding them. So I have a lot of clients who are in their 30s and 40s, not a ton in their 20s, but have kids in their 20s. So, it's just really listening and understanding what people need and what their pain point are. And I think more importantly than that, it's to meet them where they are, not judge, understand that people have different experiences, different, lives they've come from, and really trying to understand that our way isn't necessarily better. I think I've learned so much. I'm a big proponent of having mentors up and down. So I've learned as much from people significantly younger than me than I have from people significantly older. So just really embracing and understanding where everybody's coming from. But as far as a brand, I don't change who I am based on my audience at all. And I think that's one thing with consistency is I show up the way I am. And if millennials gravitate to that, that's fantastic. And if they don't, that's okay, because I have 40 and 50-year-olds who don't gravitate to it either. So it's really just being consistent across the board and listening to understand.
Mike?
I'm not going to say a lot here because Kristen answered the question I would like to think I largely would have. Although I will say this, I've got you beat. I turned 52 weeks ago. So, it is about listening. I think the hardest part about getting older in business is starting to think that you know everything and starting to think that you've somehow earned something. And I found that if I think that neither one is true, then that keeps me open. And what lets me be an effective mad scientist is to be open to data. And people who have more experience in the market or generally do not have a monopoly on good information and good data. And I think that the sign of a mature mind is somebody who will change their mind based on new and relevant and credible information. So, again, I think what Kristen said is the key. Are you a learner? Do you have an open mindset? Do you have a resistance to change? And if you don't have a resistance to change, particularly a pathological one, I think you can scale your mentality and your mindset up and down to whatever generation you desire.
Rory, your thoughts on bridging generational differences with a brand?
I've hired and trained a lot of people that started young, coming out of college, and kind of worked their way up. And I think that the first thing that anyone should get right about branding and kind of building a product or service is you have to believe in it as much as possible. And you also have to make it as good as possible, right? So I think a lot of people say, and this happens tons in multiple markets, but they say, okay, this is what people want right now, so I'm going to make that. And then when people don't want that anymore, you're lost. You're like, I don't know what to make next or what to do, because you weren't building it something that you believed in and something that you wanted to have in your kit. And so focusing on that helps a lot. And then the next stage is not trying too hard to oversell to people that don't want your product anyway, right? If they were going to take it, if they want to get involved with your brand, they would have. You don't have to fight really hard to save everyone. And you can go into, churn and user acquisition and whatever else to try and help build people in. But remember, it's still got to start with you, because when the market shifts, you're going to want to have that why and that thought process to bridge there. And then the second thing is just what Mike and Kristen were talking about. It's kind of being humble, right? Understanding that you don't know everything. And, all the time some new fad comes out, everyone says, oh, that's dumb. That doesn't make any sense, even though it's the biggest brand in the world. It's just, if you feel that way about it, it means there's something fundamental about it you don't understand. There's something that is working in that market that people are really engaging with, and it's doing well. Figure out what that is and make sure you understand it. So if there's any corollaries, you can integrate that into your brand and make sure it's working, because all that's just immersive development in the market itself.
Thank you guys for that insight. I think those are great lessons and takeaways for all of us to be better listeners, lifelong learners, and have a willingness to change. They seems like great points of advice for everyone. With that being said, now that you guys have firmly established brands and have fought all the battles, what advice would you give your younger self? Rory, can you kick us off?
Sure, that's a great question. A lot of things come to mind that would kind of pour onto it, but I think I'm just going to double down on just getting rid of fear. I think when you're starting out, especially if you're young and you have all these social pressures that you haven't learned how to conquer yet, you kind of take steps meekly, or you decide that you're going to go with the status quo instead of what you believe is right. Just kind of be willing to take those steps, because even if you fail, you learn so much, and you learn it in your gut and instinct of like, oh, that's why it didn't work. And then when you kind of move on, and markets are changing so rapidly now that if you don't have that empirical experience, it's really hard to keep up with them, because you just don't know what to do next. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that most industries have a half-life of knowledge of about 5 to 7 years now. So if you know everything about an industry, in 5 years, half of what you know is obsolete and wrong. And so you just need to be kind of absorbing that constantly and be willing to just try things just for the sake of, hey, maybe I'm not doing what I'm doing for a year. Maybe I'm doing it for 60 years. And it's more important that early on, I learn these lessons so that I can apply them as I go through my career.
Mike, what advice would you give your younger self?
Well, it depends on how young. One piece of advice I give 20-somethings now is, particularly if you're looking for a job in finance, I say, start a blog, start a YouTube channel, start something in media that shows your passion, that shows and that forces you to learn, and then present and showcase the knowledge that you're learning along the way. Because unless you have some super kick-ass internship, that's the next best way to really showcase that you actually do have a passion for that job, that career, and you know something about it, as opposed to just saying it in your cover letter and your LinkedIn profile and so forth. But when I was 20, the internet was a very different place. It was barely emerging from Department of Defense territory. So, but if I go back to when I was, say 35, I would have said, start a blog or start some sort of media channel and just post something every day, even if it's a diary, just to accumulate thoughts, knowledge, because it puts you in a much better position, for example, to do what Kristen is doing, which is writing books, or do some sort of other media compilation. And, I can't tell you, in my experience, people still email me and ask me questions, or even want to hire me based on something that I wrote 10, 15 years ago. That's the good side of stuff on the internet not disappearing, even if you desperately wanted to. So, that is one edge of the sword that can be used for good and not evil. And, it's never too late to start. Everybody has a unique voice to bring to the table. And, the media has been so democratized that yes, you get raving lunatics that have an audience, and it's frustrating. But you also get people that are truly thoughtful and profound and are brilliant, from whom we would never have ever heard if not for the internet. So if you have that voice, or you want to have that voice, go for it, and don't be selfish and keep it to yourself.
Thank you, Mike. Chris, what advice would you give your younger self?
There's a couple things. I would say first and foremost, it kind of piggybacks on Mike a little bit. I call it your uniqueifier. Find your uniqueifier. What is it that's different about you that nobody else in your industry is offering? And it could be through the work you're doing. It could be something about your personality. But in order to do that, what I would really want my younger self to know is you've got to be yourself. Like, you can't try to fit in. So always try to stand out. And, we've all heard that Dr. Seuss quote about standing out and being you, but there's one that Chanel put out that said, in order to be irreplaceable, in order to be irreplaceable, one must always be different. So I think for my younger self, I would have sought out what made me different sooner, as opposed to trying to fit in so much. And then the second thing is just know what you stand for. I'm a big Brendon Burchard fan, and he wrote the book High Performance Habits, and he talks a lot about your messages or your themes or the things that permeate across your personal life, your professional life, and everything. So I think the more we know kind of what we want to put out to the world, it gets way easier to just kind of live in that. And if you're doing the right stuff and using your strengths, you'll make money at it for sure.
You all have podcast shows. Can you give us some advice on how you went about starting it? How you come up with ideas for topics, and walk us through that process? Can you continue, Kristen?
Yeah, sure. I've had my podcast. It's called No Limits. We just passed our 2-year mark. One of the things I did personally when I decided to launch the podcast is I hired producers to help with it. And while it's so easy to technically do everything, and we've got mics and all that stuff at home now, I hired Liger Partners here in Atlanta, and they're fantastic. So they help me with making sure that all of my topics are on themes. They help me with booking guests. They do all the technical pieces, because as I'm running my consulting firm, as easy as it may be to upload a podcast to iTunes, I just don't have time to do that. So for me, and my advice to anybody that asks me about it is, if you've got the budget, hire somebody to help you with the logistical pieces, because then you're really the on-air person, and you can put all your effort and all your energy into providing good content, which is what I'm most focused on.
Rory?
I think if you're looking for guidance on that, I'd recommend any of Gary Vee or Gary Vaynerchuk's content. And he's a big proprietor of document, don't create. And I think that's right, is that there's so much opportunity out there, is that you can overthink it and spend, a month on one episode of a podcast when everyone else is making 30 a month, right? So you just got to get in the throes of doing it and talk and see. And the great part about any online business now is you get analytics, right? So you can put out a podcast episode, or put out 10, see that episode 3 and 7 did really well, then double down on what those did and keep going from there. It's a very iterative process. So just start, find topics that make sense for you, make ideas. And you can even just start a podcast, learn everything from it, then start a new one with a different name and brand that differently. I think the big thing is everyone's so worried about the social pressure that comes from, my voice will be out there, instead of just saying, okay, screw it, I'm going to start creating and see what works. And then I'll have both my gut and empirical evidence that it does work, and I can build on top of that. So I would say just go, make a podcast, make 100 episodes, look back on it, study it, and then make more, rather than trying to figure out how to do it right the first time.
Mike, what advice do you have on starting a podcast?
Again, I think Kristen's advice is very well taken. This is my second podcast, Decision Vision. I had a podcast for a number of years called Startup Lounge, which did very well, at least as well as a podcast would have done in the prior decade. It's a different market now. But my partner, who's very gifted and a natural entertainer, also took on all the production. And frankly, he burned out. So after 42 podcasts, once he had 2 kids and he had some career issues he had to pay attention to, and I didn't have the technical knowledge to pick this up. And we didn't have the budget for a producer. It just died on the vine. And I tried to replace him with a co-host. It didn't work. And it's unfortunate. If we had had a producer, that would still, I think that podcast would still be going, or would have had a much larger run. So we got a producer for Decision Vision. And in developing our topic, we wanted to do two things. One is we didn't want to make it an accounting podcast, right? Right? Who wants to listen to even 10 minutes of debits and credits or filling out 1040s or anything like that, right? And second, we wanted it to be a genuinely giving exercise where we share what we think is best in knowledge in terms of strategic thinking. And along the way, we did a lot of searching to make sure there wasn't an existing podcast like that, right? We didn't want to be a Me Too without the hashtag. We didn't want to just sort of piggyback or copy, because why do it, right? And we settled on this Decision Vision that talks about getting inside the decision maker's head and walking through the algorithms and processes to arrive at a good decision, because everybody's circumstances are different. So you can't possibly tell everybody in a podcast that you don't know what you should do, but you can tell people, you can give people a process, a Swiss Army knife, if you will, that in any process, in any decision they have to undertake, what will put you in the best position to have that decision be a sound and successful one. And so that's kind of how we got there, is that there seemed to be a need. It wasn't accounting. And it was something that, again, kind of matched up with my personal brand as the mad scientist, is that we don't care about the what, we care more about the how and the why.
My last question before we get into some Q&A might already be explained by some of your previous answers, but given the current environment, I think it bears asking. And we'll just go right back to you, Mike. Do you think the current environment of COVID-19 affects your branding strategy or will force you to pivot?
It will not force me to pivot, but it does force me to think about branding. And it forced me to think about branding in this way. One of the things I do and have done for about a year now is a chart of the day. Every work day on LinkedIn, I rip off somebody else's chart, give it due attribution, post on my LinkedIn. It's a piece of visual information out there. And as COVID really got going, of course, there are all kinds of charts out there for COVID, right? Disease vectors, vaccine timelines, infection factors, all kinds of things, frankly, that I would have been perfectly happy if I had never learned about in my entire life. But now I know what these things are, and everybody on this podcast does as well, right? And over time, I decided to stop posting that because it became morbid and maudlin and also repetitive, right? There's just nothing. If you really want to know about COVID, it's hard not to have somebody in your ear and in your face talking about COVID and masks and everything else. And it struck me that if I stuck with that, that was going to be a source of negativity. And that's not something I want associated, frankly, with my personal brand. So unless there's something exceptional, I did break from that when we saw meat packing plants go offline, because I did think there's a story to tell about potential food shortages and supply chain constraints, but I did that only very briefly. And then on Facebook, not LinkedIn, I made a conscious decision that if I was going to post anything about COVID, it was going to be something positive. And if that makes me a unicorns and rainbow guy, fine. But there's plenty of negativity out there. I think that I can be of service to whatever market thinks that what I have is useful to say, to be some source of positivity. There's plenty of negativity out there. They don't need another person putting another log on the fire.
Kristen, your thoughts?
Mine are similar, but I would say the opposite. My brand did not change at all, but I would say I did have to pivot my business. So for my brand, I'm a unicorns and rainbow person anyway, but follow it up with a lot of strategy. So I tend to skew away from politics, religion, all that type of stuff. I don't tend to post things that are overly polarizing because, like I said, my personal belief is that first of all, I'm not going to convince anybody on Facebook to change their mind. And the people that are thinking they're posting this stuff and they're going to convince people, that's how they want to spend their time. That's fine. But it's, my brand didn't change. I continued to post strategies and motivational things and useful tips. So branding wise, I stayed completely consistent, which I appreciate. And then, but from a pivot standpoint, I did have to change my offerings because I do a lot of speaking engagements. Obviously my speaking engagements for the next 6 months all came off the books. That's a big, it's a big part of my business. It's a big revenue stream for my business. So I did have to pivot that. So with that, very quickly, we ordered stuff to set up a video suite and be able to record things at home so I could push out content quicker and easier that I would have normally delivered in person. So it definitely required a pivot. I took, like most people, a week or so of being, is this real? It was a combination of, is this real? Is it going to last? And I'm a little ticked off about it right now. So once I got past that, I went into strategy mode and just said, okay, what would best serve my audience and my target markets from a content standpoint? So I just moved in that direction. So it'll be virtual for a while. My hope is we get back to speaking because I love live audiences, but until we can get back to whatever new normal is going to look like, we all need to kind of adjust our offerings to fit our market and best be able to serve them still.
Rory?
I think anytime you see a shakeup like this, it's good to kind of see where it's heading and what opportunities there are. Usually anytime, this is affecting almost every industry on the planet, right? This is very, very unprecedented, but just see what the needs are and what areas of what you have work best. So for me, I actually slowed down a lot over the last few weeks on content and independent work, and have been ramping up significantly in life coaching and consulting. It's just because their need for that is so high right now that I can fill my whole calendar full of one-on-ones and meetups in consulting with companies and things like that, because they're confused, they're lost, they don't know what to do. And so it's really just kind of being willing to shift to what you need to do right now, what's working, because not a lot of people need the content as much as they actually need real advice on where to go. And so just be willing to be flexible on that, and also look at what the needs are of people around you, right? So if live events go away, if food becomes a problem, people are staying home a lot, how do you reach those people, and how do you provide something that they want? And I think that's kind of, anytime something changes or something new appears, you want to think about how can I best serve these people, not, like what's going to happen. It's like, okay, I'm here to help. I'm here to offer what I have. And whatever that works best, I'm be flexible and apply it.
Andrew, can I add something? Rory said something that jogged something that I want to add to my answer, because I did pivot a little bit and I didn't realize it until Rory mentioned it, which is that we've issued a number of special podcasts through Decision Vision that are actually much more tactical. They're entirely the opposite of what I talked about in terms of generic decision-making tools. But there's about a half dozen episodes that we put up there that talk, and they're even off schedule. They're no longer, they weren't on our weekly schedule. They're just jammed in there as soon as we could get them out there, because we thought people would want and need some information on, okay, I and my business have just been throat punched, right? How do we respond to this, and how do we respond to this quickly? Because, speed of response in this is so important. That is one way that we actually pivoted, and I didn't even realize it until Rory kind of jogged my memory. So I want to put that out there.
Thank you. Let's move to some questions from the audience. I think Rachel is going to monitor the chat and the Q&A box. If we could maybe just have one or two of our panelists answer. We've got about 15 minutes left. I'd like to have an opportunity to get to all of our questions.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So we actually have several questions from our attendees in the chat box, and I'll start off with one from Tony, and he says, there seems to be a growing school of thought that having a niche is absolutely necessary to have a successful small business. However, it can be scary to seemingly narrow down your potential consumer base to a small audience just as you're starting out. Is it necessary for any small business owner to have a niche in this day and age? So do you need a niche, or should you not narrow down your audience?
I'll talk on that one for a minute. I think it depends. So it's also going to depend on your market and your industry as well. You know, I work a lot in the financial and professional services industry. So a lot of advisors, accountants, attorneys in that industry. Yes, absolutely. You need a niche, but not necessarily at the beginning. So, you know, when you're launching a small business, first and foremost, the small business needs to survive. So if that means early on in the early stages, you're seeing some people that are outside of your target market or your niche, that's completely fine from a revenue standpoint, but you want to continue building your offerings, your content, and your brand to serve the niche. And then it will naturally evolve. But I think starting out, first and foremost, we want you to survive. We've got to get you past those first few years. So I would look at your market and then look at what revenue you need to start with.
That was a great answer, Chris. And Katie says, if you're just getting started with your brand, do you have any tips on how to find your direction, meaning something you're confident in and brand that's authentic to you?
I'll grab that one. This is something that I love to kind of preach to people that are starting out is you're never going to find your niche or your brand if you just take a single shot at it, right? The whole point is that a successful brand that's good for the long term is a marriage between here's what I want to do and here's what works. Let's put them together, right? Because you could want to do something and no one wants it, and that's a waste. And you could have something that everyone wants, but you don't like doing it, and that's going to burn out over time, right? So the good thing is just to start with a direction, make sure you have a good why, try it out, and then get in the trenches and dig for 90 days, come up for air and say, oh, this worked, that didn't, and let's see how I can integrate that until I go in the next one. It's going to take a few cycles before you get it. So if you're starting out, find something that you're passionate about that you think is going to work. You're probably wrong about it anyways. Try it, get some data on it. And then once you look at that and say, did this work or not, that's how you start adjusting it. And if you look at most successful brands, that's how they start, right? It's a couple failures. They figure out what works, what people actually want, and then they put their own spin on it. And that's when it really starts to click.
Awesome, Rory. And I think we have one that might be great for Mike. Working hard for something we don't care about is called stress. Working hard for something we love is called passion. Do you agree? And could you give us an example?
Yeah, this is the kind of question you want to put your toga on for, but I would phrase it a little bit differently. I think working hard for something you don't care about and you feel trapped in, that's what creates the stress, right? You can work hard for something that you don't necessarily care about. If there's some sort of greater goal in life or your purpose, then, you can put up with that. Where the stress comes is you're in that condition and you don't see a path to get yourself out of it and you feel trapped. That's where the stress comes from. But I can tell you, I'm fortunate that I work in an area of which I feel very passionate about. And my life is not stress-free at all. And I think it's because I set very high expectations for myself, and I attract clients that set very expectations in general. And but that's how you grow, right? I've never read or heard of anybody talking about growth coming out of a position of comfort. And so to me, I don't think that stress means that what you're doing is meaningless, and if you love what you're doing, that you never have stress. I think stress again comes from a vantage point of how much freedom and choice do you have in your current scenario and in your current environment.
That was great insight. I actually really love that answer, Mike. Thank you so much. And this one I think would be awesome for Kristen. How do you navigate the fine line between maintaining your authenticity and selling your brand/products? For example, I always feel a bit awkward making posts on Instagram when I have a new product, but I genuinely love what I'm making. I don't want to come off as cheesy sales pitch. How do I balance that?
I think that is a fantastic question, and it's one I get a lot. I will say I get this question a lot more from females than I do from men. And I like to call it shameless self-promotion. because this is something that naturally a lot of women in business are not as comfortable with. So it's very, very common. So there's two things I would suggest. First is enthusiasm. You know, it's a lot of times people have trouble. They're feeling like they're bragging about a product or a service or an award or something. But instead of saying, I'm fantastic, I, offer this, you could say, I'm so excited about this new product. I had so much fun doing it. So sharing fun and enthusiasm always helps. The second thing I would say is if you're feeling awkward, well, first of all, we just got to do it. I mean, don't pause back. But the second thing is find your group. I mean, I promise you, you've got friends and clients and colleagues and people who will help share with you. Every time I launch something, I have emailed and texted and group messaged 20 of my closest friends saying, hey, would you share this post? Would you do this? I'm launching this. They all know. And if they're in your network and your tribe, they're really going to want to help promote too. So I would encourage your friends and then just get out and share your enthusiasm about it.
Enthusiasm's super important. Thanks,
Can I
Kristen.
jump on that one as well?
Yeah, go ahead, Rory.
So I'm gonna jump on that one because I actually get this question a ton as well from different age groups and both genders as well, but it is a little bit more women on my side. But I think that this is the mental construct I've been giving people and the advice I give to help them work through this specific problem is there's two main things you want to remember. First, you have to convince yourself first. If you're not enthusiastic about it, if you're not excited about it, if you wouldn't buy it or you don't think there's any inherent value in what you're doing, you're not going to convince anyone of it. So first, just make sure it's something you want and you look at it and say, yeah, there's value there and I want to share that value with the world. And the second thing is, as long as you're being truthful in your advertising, like you're not being facetious, you're not lying, you're not trying to trick someone or using something like that. You're just saying, hey, this is why it's good. There's nothing wrong with that ever. So as long as you're excited about it and you know there's something good about it, just share, like, here are the specs, here's the value of it. And you're not necessarily trying to convince everyone. I see this a lot with folks that go down this road as well. They try 3 people and they all say no and they think, oh, well, what I'm doing sucks. You want to think about it in the reverse. Say, okay, I know there's value in what I'm doing. My job now is to find the people that see that value too. And it may not be the first 5 people, it may not be the first 100 people, but some group of people out there find value in this. My job is to find them, not to worry about the people that don't see it.
That's very well said, Rory. Thanks so much. And this next one is kind of up for grabs. It has to do with LinkedIn. How important is LinkedIn in your brand? It seems in the last 12 to 18 months has become a spam central and ongoing automated messages to try and sell something. Is it still a good platform for prospecting and making connections? If so, how do you legitimately stand out and not get lumped in with the thousands of others that are using it in an unprofessional manner?
I could start. This one's fun because if you track the history of LinkedIn, if you track the history of LinkedIn, even the time around Glassdoor started, it was very much a functional tool for hiring and for HR reps and headhunters to kind of work together and find people. But I think LinkedIn started falling to the wayside when it didn't have very many social media functions on it. And once they started adding those is when it evolved into a social media platform. I mean, it's almost a Twitter or a Facebook at this point. Now, it does mean that it's really good to put content out on it, like blogs and information pieces and things like that. And you can actually get a lot of hits through that website, but it is a little bit less of a connection website than it used to. So I would treat it more of like a hybrid social media / an extra page for your brand rather than just a purely professional website.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. I love it because you can post articles and use it almost as a blog page for you. If you're in professional services, I do like the connection piece. I try to take the connection offline to stand out because you are going to seem spammy. I get at least 10, 20 messages a day from people on LinkedIn. The funniest thing is when they're telling me how they know they could help me and they do exactly the same work I do. So it's, most people aren't paying attention. So if you do want to stand out, get personal, figure out your person that you have in common, ask for a personal introduction, pick up the phone, send them a text. There's ways to get in front of people. I do use Navigator though, and I use the notifications and the mentioned in the news section on Sales Navigator. And I use the Just Change Jobs feature on Sales Navigator because those give me reasons to reach out to somebody. Hey, I read your article in Forbes, or I saw that you just changed firms, and that gives me a good way to connect with them personally. That will always stand out above anything you spam on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
Only that LinkedIn is a power tool, and a power tool misused can have catastrophic consequences and be very damaging, but if used correctly can multiply the work of a person. So yeah, I think using it as, in fact, it's replaced my blog site, it's replaced my mailing list because it's a lot easier to manage and have people opt in. And then, you know, as Kristen said, you know, you can use the same kind of human relationship building tools that we use elsewhere. You don't have to spam people with it. Again, it's really just about how you use it. And yeah, you know, do you get the annoying connection of somebody that wants to sell you something that is just nonsensical and a non-starter? Yeah, but I think the only way you can really avoid that ever happening to you on any medium is to just go off the grid someplace in Montana and just make yourself unreachable and uncontactable. I mean, as soon as there's an audience aggregated somewhere, it's going to get spammed. That's just the nature of marketing.
Yeah, that's very, very true. We have a couple more questions. What are some questions you've asked yourself to help discern your temperament, dreams, and goals? This might be a good one for Kristen.
You know, they change a lot I won't say they change a lot, but over the years, I would say every year I do a planning session with myself. I started a couple years ago going away for a weekend, and I always start with kind of a what do you want exercise, like what do I really want to get out of this next year? And it always fast forwards, you know, 5 years, 10 years. I start with the why and the what. You know, what is it I want my life to look like? So I first and foremost start there, and then I back into, you know, who's it I really want to be around. My rule of thumb with anything I do or anybody I'm around is if it's not bringing me joy or moving me closer to my goals, I say no. So if it's, you know, if it's a person, a thing, an event, an opportunity, a client, that's kind of my barometer. So I think that's the questions I ask myself. Is it bringing me joy, getting me excited, or is it moving me closer to one of my personal, professional, or financial goals? That's probably my big question.
Great. I love the Marie Kondo, bringing you joy.
I know. I Marie Kondoed my closet several years ago. I was ahead of it before the show came out, so it was fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Rory, did you have something to add?
Yeah, let me jump on that. I think, you know, we're machines that like to seek competence, and we like to make things better. And that's how we started, you know, with fires and cavemen and started flying in planes, right? We always want to try and improve. And I think that is a natural, like if you read Drive, it's one of my favorite books, talks about the different areas of motivation and what makes you move and what makes your brain get excited. I think that's probably the easiest question to get into it is ask yourself if you would like to get better at it, right? Do you seek greater competence? Do you seek more knowledge or not? If it's something that, and don't get caught up in, oh, this is rote and, you know, I have to fill out forms, whatever. No one likes that stuff. I'm just being in general. Do you see a future where you would like to get better or do more or be better at that thing? And if that lines up, then it's a good sign that it's something that, you know, subconsciously you're looking for. And you got to listen to that voice as much as possible. I think on the side of temperament, it's a good one too, because you have to be honest with yourself of the direction you're going, figure out what kind of environment you would be in if you got there, and then determine if that's an environment that you could thrive in, right? If you're someone who, say you're socially anxious and shy and you want to be a lawyer, it's going to be kind of a temperament mismatch, right? You're going to have to be cutthroat in that sort of environment and not anxious, not shy. You have to kind of get what you want. And so think about where you're going and match it up with your temperament. If you're someone that, you know, you're climbing the corporate ladder, but you're always worried about the little guy and you want to help mentor people and do things like that, obviously you enjoy the person-to-person contact, not, you know, the quarterlies and things like that. So just be really careful about your temperament and think about it. Okay, this thing I'm doing, do I actually want to get better at this? Do I enjoy getting competency in what I'm doing? And if you do, stick those together. And if you don't, try to avoid it.
Awesome. And I think we have a little bit of time for one last question. What's the greatest risk you've taken that could have damaged your personal brand, and how did you deal with the result? I think I would love to hear everyone's insight on this. Are we thinking? I'll put Mike on the spot. Are you ready, Mike?
Yeah. I think the biggest risk I've taken is one that I'm actually taking now. So, and this actually segues to the last question. One thing I've been trying to figure out is I want to get involved in more international projects, international ideas and relationships, because that's something I've always been good at. Candidly, to varying levels of competency, I speak 8 languages. And so one of the things I've been doing with LinkedIn now is I have been subscribing to foreign language feeds and starting to post on those feeds in some languages in which I'm not very good at all. But I'm well enough to kind of be understood, but I'm also hoping I'm not making a fool out of myself or accidentally, frankly, insulting somebody, which is a risk when you learn and apply foreign languages. But the only way that you get better at them is to try them. Nobody has ever become fluent in a language in a classroom, ever. And so that's a risk I've taken, and I've expanded it because one of the nice things about doing that is it's given me access to other foreign news media that covers things that the English language media does not. And so I've started pulling some of that material back, more on Facebook than LinkedIn, to point out things that people are talking about in terms of international business and economics and finance that are not covered in the American media or not covered very well. And that also can be something of a, that's also something of a risk, because, and the biggest critique I get on that is, why don't you just use Google Translate? I said, well, I don't want to use Google Translate. That's not the point. If I wanted to use a computer to understand people, I'd be using an AI tool. That's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing it because I want to understand at a cerebral level, not at a mechanical level. And some people, frankly, find that off-putting and pretentious. And I've decided that I'm going to live with that because that's a talent that I have, and I'm not going to hide it. So it has been a risk. I think over time it'll be a net positive, but it has not been without taking a couple of bruises along the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. Rory, have you had time to think of your biggest risk?
I have, and it's going to be kind of corny. I think the biggest risk is to play it safe too often. I think we're, especially now, gosh, we're in this cancel culture, and this, like, there's so many people that have so many voices in so many places that there's just no way you're not going to have someone dislike you or get pissed at you or hate you. I spent 10 years in like PR, right? So I've had death threats, I've had all kinds of things, right? That's going to come no matter what you do, because everyone has different ideas. So being too cautious or just be too PG, I think can hurt you in the long run. And I think the core you should always look for when it comes to personal brand is make sure that you're doing it for you, that it's something that you believe in and it's defensible, because the last thing you want is to do something that you think is the right thing to do and it goes wrong and you can't even defend it because you didn't want to do it in the first place, right? So just avoid that at all costs and just make sure it's like, yes, I'm going to take this risk, but it has to be a risk all the time. And that's how you learn. No one becomes the top of their industry by playing it safe and walking on eggshells, right? Make those early mistakes and move forward. People can change their minds. You can go straight into PR if you really want to figure out how to deal with the narrative and how to deal with consumers and things like that. But just be willing to take the step and make sure it's something that you would do, and you would, if you had to defend it, you could. And if you can, that's all you really need.
That's great advice. Thanks so much, Rory. All right, Kristen, to round us out.
I think it's a lot of what Rory was saying. I think for me, it's been, I don't have much of a filter, so I say whatever I think. I have over the years I've been very conscious that I'm not making a personal attack on a person, on an individual. I did that a couple of times early on. That kind of backfired a little bit. They were more or less business and more personal. So I do tend to make my lack of filter more topical. But to Rory's point, I think the challenge, the greatest risk I'm facing right now, and it's still a balancing act for me, is not to hold back too much, not to be too conservative, because I work in a business and a professional environment, but I still have this fun, goofy side. And all my personal clients, like my private coaching clients, are all like, you're so like silly and goofy and fun. But that's the part that if you look at me or follow me online, you get a lot of business tactics. So I think it's learning the balance of not holding back. So that's, my greatest risk is that I'm starting to not do that, but it's also been what's held me back. So it's a risk and a challenge, I guess, at the same time. I'm moving in that direction. So we should see more fun stuff hopefully coming up. Like, I'll give you an example. Sarah Blakely, I follow her, obviously the founder of Spanx. and she and her husband Jesse, I'm in a mastermind group with him, and they're on a road trip right now, and she's posting videos of them singing in the car, and it was just so cool. It was so on brand for her, but it was a very fun way to see the personal side of her, which I think makes her, as an entrepreneur and as a customer of her own company, I think that makes you able to connect with her. So it's a risk, but it's also an opportunity just to kind of let go and be yourself a little bit more, even the fun side.
Thank you, Rachel, for that Q&A. I'd like to thank our panelists from today's program. This is such an important topic for our young professionals. Rachel, can you let everyone know about NextGen upcoming events?
Yeah, of course. So again, I'm Rachel Dangerfield. I'm the Leadership Programs Coordinator at the Chamber, and I'm also the liaison for the NextGen Committee. We're hard at work right now planning our next June event. We'll be bringing together some financial planners and banking professionals to help us learn more about planning for financial futures. We know that that's a big thing with the next generation, millennials. So I really hope you can all join us. To learn more about this event and our program in general, I'd love for you to check out our Chamber's website. It's www.gnfcc.com. I can also put that in the chat box. And really just a huge thanks to Andrew and Brady Ware, and of course our panelists, Rory, Kristen, and Mike. This has been spectacular, guys. Thank you so much. Your insight and expertise is phenomenal. And we just really look forward to seeing everyone that was on at future NextGen events. Virtually and in person, hopefully soon. And I just hope you all have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us. And so with that, if no one has anything else to say or ask, I will go ahead and close out the meeting. And thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.